Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The morning felt heavy. Sitting alone in the kitchen, I clutched my coffee, feeling the room close in. Claire, my wife of nearly 15 years, stood in front of me, her voice weaving in and out of the elaborate script she'd clearly prepared. Every word had the polish of a rehearsed speech. This wasn't the first sign, but it was the first time she'd chosen to be so candid about it. "You have to understand," she said, her tone calm, almost motherly. "This is about self-discovery. I need this, I really do." It was like listening to a stranger, a version of her I didn't recognize. She spoke about the limitations of monogamy, about how she needed to find herself and explore. Her gaze never quite met mine as she spoke, skimming the surface of our shared life like it was some obstacle she needed to vault over. She tried to make it sound like a phase, like some right she was entitled to claim. And through it all, my coffee grew cold. I didn't interrupt her, not once, not even to laugh at the absurdity of it. I just let her words sink into the quiet around us. My mind, however, was far from the placid lake I presented on the outside. Behind the calm exterior, I was tracing back the last few months, piecing together every moment I'd ignored or dismissed, the extended work trips, her sudden fixation on me time, and then that lingering VoIP number on her phone bill. That strange area code had nagged at me, a small anomaly in the fabric of our otherwise seamless life. And yet, I'd ignored it. Brushed it aside as if the foundation of our marriage were strong enough to support the weight of that suspicion. For the first few minutes, Claire's words had bounced off me like hail on a windshield. But then she leaned into her speech, her voice softening, earnest. "I do love you," she insisted, her eyes finally meeting mine for a fleeting second. "It's just that, people change. They grow. We both deserve to explore life, to see if we're really," she caught herself, looking away as if she'd gone too far. The weight of her confession, the finality of her words, settled heavily between us. She could try to dress it up however she wanted, but the reality was cold and unforgiving. Claire had decided to step outside of our marriage. My mind flashed back to the night I'd first sensed it, 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday evening. She'd been a little too quick to reach for her phone, her thumb a little too nervous over the screen. When I'd asked her what she was reading, she'd offered a quick, flustered excuse about work emails, her eyes darting away. But the reality I now faced was far graver than I'd let myself imagine. She had wrapped her betrayal in flowery words and philosophical musings, but it was a betrayal nonetheless. It was an affair. "Claire," I said, my voice catching slightly, betraying a sliver of the anger simmering below the surface. "I understand that you need something, but it's clear you've already decided what that something is. And it's not us. Not this life." I gestured around the kitchen, our kitchen, where we'd shared countless mornings just like this one, although none of them had ever felt this wrong. She looked taken aback, a touch of surprise flitting across her face, as if she hadn't anticipated that I would push back. "This isn't about you," she murmured, as if that could somehow excuse it. "It's not about what we have. It's just something I need to do. For myself." I sat in silence for a moment, letting the emptiness of her words hang between us. It was incredible, really, she genuinely believed this was a path of self-discovery, as if cheating was just a higher form of personal enlightenment. But all I could feel was the sting of betrayal, dull and throbbing, seeping into every corner of the room. I shifted in my seat, suddenly hyper-aware of the weight of my own silence. Every second that passed felt like a little more dignity slipping away, like she was stripping me down with each carefully chosen word. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. I had let her speak, let her paint her betrayal in whatever colors she liked, but now it was my turn. "Claire," I began slowly, careful to keep my voice steady, "do you remember the vows we took?" She froze, her face hardening slightly. "I'm not saying that to guilt-trip you or to drag you through some emotional wringer. But do you remember that we promised to be faithful? To build something together?" She looked away, uncomfortable, but I didn't stop. I let the words pour out, calm but unyielding. You know, people can change, sure. But I thought we'd built something worth holding on to. I thought that if you needed something more, you'd come to me, not someone else. I tried, she said softly, almost to herself. I did try. I wanted to believe her. But the facts remained, the clandestine phone calls, the whispers of lies, and the calculated script she'd so easily recited. There was no trying in any of it. Only choices, deliberate choices she had made without me. The truth of it felt like an ice bath, shocking and clarifying. I could feel my body tensing, as if gearing up for a battle I hadn't even realized I'd been preparing for. But there was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just a cold, methodical rage building inside me, as I mentally drew the boundaries of my own exit plan. Claire, I think you need to pack a bag, I said finally, the words emerging with a quiet steeliness. Take whatever you need for now. I think you should go. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. Her mouth opened, a slight tremor in her lips, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. But I saw something else there too, a flicker of relief, a glint of something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. It was as if she'd known this was coming, maybe even hoped for it. As she turned to leave the room, I felt an odd sense of detachment wash over me. I watched her retreating figure, her steps slow, careful, like she was afraid that one wrong move would break the tenuous calm that had settled over the room. I didn't follow her. I just sat there, staring at the coffee cup still steaming faintly in my hands, watching as the life I'd built began to fracture around me. In the silence that followed, I allowed myself a single, cold thought. Claire may have thought she was prepared, but she had no idea just how ready I was for this. I spent the next hour sitting alone in the kitchen, my thoughts spinning in tight, dizzying circles. Claire was upstairs packing her things, and I could hear the muted sounds of drawers opening and closing, the quiet rustle of her belongings being folded and tucked away. Every so often, a silence would settle over the house, and I'd find myself holding my breath, waiting for the next sound, the next proof that this was really happening. Part of me expected her to come down, maybe with some last-minute plea or apology. But the minutes stretched on, and no such moment came. As I sat there, my mind drifted back to the past few months, replaying every little detail I had ignored. There were the late nights she'd spend in the other room, claiming she needed to work on personal projects. There were the sudden silences when I walked into a room, the way she'd sometimes glance at her phone with a flicker of excitement that she couldn't quite hide. Each of these moments had been a crack, barely noticeable on its own, but now I could see how they had splintered, how they had all pointed to this inevitable breaking point. I reached for my phone and pulled up our last few text conversations, scrolling through them with a detached curiosity. They were so normal, so painfully ordinary. Grocery lists, reminders about bills, little jokes about the kids in the neighborhood. There was nothing in those messages that hinted at the truth. If anyone else looked at them, they would see nothing but the mundane routine of a married couple's life. But now, reading them, every word felt hollow, every little exchange drenched in the irony of what was happening. My grip tightened on the phone as my mind turned to the future. I had spent years building a life with Claire, investing my time, energy, and love into this relationship. I had trusted her completely, never once doubting that we were a team, that we were working toward the same goals. And yet, here we were, facing the fallout of her choices. I felt a slow, simmering anger begin to rise, not the explosive kind that would make me shout or throw things, but a cold, controlled rage. The kind that makes you think clearly, methodically. A sudden noise upstairs broke my thoughts. I could hear Claire coming down, her suitcase wheels bumping against each step. She moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if she was testing the ground with every step. When she finally entered the kitchen, her gaze was averted, focused somewhere around my shoes rather than meeting my eyes. "Is there anything else you need?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I could see her flinch slightly, as if my calmness had caught her off guard. She shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. "No, I think I have everything for now." We stood in silence for a moment, neither of us willing to break the tense stillness that had settled between us. I watched her, taking in the familiar lines of her face, the softness of her features. There had been a time when I would have done anything to protect her, to make her happy. But now, all I could feel was a quiet, resolute determination. She had made her choice, and I was going to make mine. Just as she turned to leave, I spoke again, my words cutting through the silence. "You know, Claire, I don't think you understand what you're giving up here. This life we built, it wasn't something that just happened. It was something we both worked for. Or at least, I thought we did." She stopped, her hand on the door handle, her shoulders tensing. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, that she might offer some last-minute explanation or apology. But instead, she simply sighed, a weary sound that seemed to carry all the weight of her decision. "I do understand," she said quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "But I also know that this is something I need to do." I watched her leave, the door closing softly behind her, and felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic declaration of betrayal. Just a quiet, unspoken agreement that this was the end of something we had once shared. It felt almost anticlimactic, as if the years we'd spent together had been reduced to this simple, silent exit. When she was gone, I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. The house felt emptier, quieter, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think about what I would do next. I had given Claire the benefit of the doubt for too long, let her live her double life without questioning it. But now, with her gone, I felt a new clarity settling over me, a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, moving through the house in a strange, detached haze. I went through our shared belongings, separating out what was hers, what was mine. It was a meticulous, almost therapeutic process, each item a reminder of the life we had built together, now slowly being dismantled. Every so often, I would come across something that made me pause, a photo from our honeymoon, a ticket stub from a concert we'd gone to on our first anniversary, a postcard she'd sent me during one of her supposed business trips. Each item was a small betrayal, a reminder of the life she had pretended to share with me. By evening, I felt drained, as if I had been carrying the weight of our marriage on my shoulders all day. I made myself a simple dinner, the silence of the house pressing in on me, heavy and relentless. It was strange, sitting there alone, eating in the same room where we had shared so many meals, so many conversations. But in a way, it felt liberating too. I was finally free from the pretense, from the silent deceit that had permeated our life together. As I finished my meal, a thought began to take shape in my mind, something dark and relentless. Claire may have thought she could walk away unscathed, that she could start fresh without any consequences. But I wasn't going to let her rewrite our story on her terms. If she wanted a new life, she would have to do it without the comfort and security I had provided. She had left me no choice, after all. And as I sat there, the quiet anger that had been simmering all day began to solidify into a plan. A plan that would make sure she understood exactly what she had lost. With renewed purpose, I rose from the table, feeling the weight of the past slip away. This was my chance to reclaim my life, to rewrite the story Claire had tried to destroy. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction, a quiet thrill at the prospect of taking control of my own fate. I was ready. The next morning, I awoke to a house that felt like an empty shell. Every corner seemed haunted by echoes of a life that no longer existed, a life Claire had shattered with her need to find herself. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something had changed within me. Gone was the hollow ache of betrayal, replaced by a fierce clarity. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. If she thought she could walk away from our marriage without consequences, she was mistaken. I got up, made myself coffee, and went to the living room. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow on the walls. It was a peaceful scene, one that used to comfort me. Now, it felt like a challenge, a silent reminder that I had to take action, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, or to make sure she didn't walk away from it unscathed. I started with our finances. Claire and I had shared everything, trusting each other implicitly. But now, I wanted to understand just how deep her betrayal went, and I knew our finances would reveal the truth. I opened my laptop and began to comb through our joint accounts, our investments, our savings. Claire had always been meticulous with money, but as I dug deeper, I noticed a few odd transactions. There were transfers to an account I didn't recognize, a few hundred here, a few thousand there. Nothing monumental, but enough to suggest she'd been quietly siphoning money away. Rage flared within me, but I kept my focus. She was already taking from me, eroding the foundation of everything we had built together. Well, two could play at that game. I spent the next few hours setting up new accounts, transferring my own assets, and rerouting my income into a separate account. If Claire was planning on using my hard-earned money to start her new life, she was in for a rude awakening. When I was done, I felt a strange satisfaction, as though I were leveling the playing field, reclaiming a part of myself that she had tried to steal. As I closed the laptop, my phone vibrated. It was a message from her. The nerve. She had barely been gone a day, and already she was reaching out, as if she had left behind some misplaced item. Her message was brief, casual even, as though she were testing the waters. Hi. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. Hope things aren't too tense. I laughed bitterly, the absurdity of her words hitting me like a punch. She was trying to be friendly, maybe even hoping for some sort of amicable closure, as though she hadn't just upended my entire life. I let the message sit unanswered, resisting the urge to respond. She didn't deserve the satisfaction of a reply, not yet. Instead, I put the phone down and began to work on the next step of my plan. Over the next few days, I threw myself into preparations, crafting every step carefully, methodically. I knew her patterns, her routines, her weaknesses. Every moment I spent organizing was a reminder that I wasn't powerless, that I could turn her betrayal into my own advantage. She wanted freedom. Fine. But I would make sure that freedom came at a cost. Part of me wanted to hire a lawyer immediately, to dive into divorce proceedings and carve out a future where she had no say. But I knew it wasn't the right time. She was still reeling, likely expecting me to react emotionally, to storm into the courthouse demanding justice. No, I would wait, watch her make her next move, and strike when she least expected it. In the meantime, I began to gather evidence, piecing together the full extent of her betrayal. I wanted to know everything, who she'd been seeing, how long it had been going on, how deep her lies had run. I accessed her old emails, combed through her social media, even checked her work schedule. It didn't take long to find the breadcrumbs she'd left behind, little clues she hadn't thought to cover up. I discovered messages exchanged with someone named Ben. They were subtle, almost cautious, but it was clear they were more than just colleagues. The messages had started innocuously enough, work-related topics, a few shared jokes, friendly exchanges. But as I read further, I saw the tone shift, becoming more personal, intimate. There were mentions of late nights, of secret getaways, of needing to be discreet. My jaw tightened as I read her words, feeling each one like a knife twist. I didn't know Ben personally, but I knew enough. I found his profile online, a flashy executive type, the kind of man who thrived on the thrill of secrecy. I could picture the way he'd wormed his way into her life, offering her the excitement she claimed she needed. Part of me wanted to confront him, to let him know exactly what I thought of him. But I knew that would be playing right into his hands, giving him the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten to me. Instead, I filed it all away, adding his name to the growing list of ammunition I was building. I wasn't just going to expose Claire's betrayal. I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth, to show her, and anyone else who thought they could get away with it, that there were consequences. The final piece of my plan took shape one evening as I sat in the quiet of the house, my mind churning with possibilities. Claire had spent years building her reputation, presenting herself as the perfect wife, the dedicated professional. She thrived on the approval of others, on the admiration she received from colleagues, friends, even family. She had wrapped herself in a cloak of respectability, and I was going to tear it away. I began drafting an email, careful to lay out every detail I'd uncovered. I addressed it to her close circle, our friends, her family, even a few of her colleagues. I included screenshots of her messages, evidence of her lies, proof of her affair. I wanted them to see the truth, to understand the betrayal she had so carefully hidden. Every word I typed felt like a blow, a release of the anger and hurt that had been festering inside me. I wasn't doing this for revenge, I told myself, but for justice. Claire had spent years manipulating me, lying to me, stealing pieces of my life for her own selfish gain. Now, I was simply reclaiming what was mine, exposing the truth she had tried so hard to bury. When the email was finally finished, I read it over one last time, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. This wasn't the end of our story, but it was a turning point, a declaration that I would no longer be her victim. She wanted freedom, but she would have to face the consequences of that choice, to live with the fallout of her actions. I saved the email as a draft, my finger hovering over the send button. A small part of me hesitated, a last remnant of the life we had shared, of the love I had once felt. But that part of me was fading, replaced by a new resolve, a new understanding of who I was without her. I hit send. The house was silent as I sat there, the weight of my actions settling over me. There was no going back now, no undoing what I had set in motion. And as I sat in that quiet, empty house, I felt a strange satisfaction, a quiet thrill at the knowledge that I had taken control of my life once more. The email I sent changed everything. I hadn't seen Claire since that morning, but I could only imagine the fallout. People I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out. Friends, even old colleagues, sent messages offering sympathy or expressing their shock. I'd anticipated the reactions, the gossip, the quiet judgment. I thought I'd be satisfied by it, that this wave of public outrage would feel like justice. But with every new message, a sense of emptiness grew inside me, a gnawing loneliness that hadn't been there before. I threw myself into work, burying my emotions in projects, deadlines, and meetings, trying to drown out the lingering ache that Claire's absence had left. For the first time in years, I was utterly alone. The quiet I had once craved now felt oppressive, a constant reminder of the life that was gone. As weeks passed, the thrill of my revenge faded, replaced by an emptiness that hung over every day like a fog. One Friday evening, after another long week, I came home to an unexpected letter waiting on the doorstep. My name was scrawled on the envelope in Claire's familiar handwriting, a little shaky but unmistakable. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest as I tore it open. The letter was short, a few paragraphs in Claire's neat handwriting. She didn't try to explain herself or ask for forgiveness. Instead, she described how the email had unraveled her life. Her family, shocked by the betrayal, had cut her off, friends had turned their backs, her colleagues distanced themselves. The man she'd been seeing, Ben, had vanished without a word, as though he'd never existed. She was left adrift, utterly alone. But as I read the final lines, I felt something twist inside me, a mix of regret and a bitter sadness. I'm not asking you to take me back. I know I destroyed us, and I can't undo that. But I want you to know something, even if it's too late. I never wanted to hurt you. I loved you once, deeply, fiercely. I wish I'd realized sooner that what I was searching for wasn't out there. It was with you, all along. She ended with an apology, a line that read more like a confession than an excuse. I'm sorry, William, for everything. I hope one day you'll remember the good, too. The letter slipped from my fingers, drifting to the floor as I stared at the empty room around me. It was then that I realized how hollow my victory had been, how little satisfaction it had brought me. I had thought that exposing her betrayal, ruining her reputation, would heal the pain, but it hadn't. Instead, it had only deepened the wound, leaving me more isolated and broken than before. I sat down, head in my hands, feeling the weight of everything I'd done, every harsh word I'd sent out into the world, every detail I'd exposed. I had wanted justice, but all I had found was a loneliness deeper than any I'd ever known. The days dragged on after that, each one bleeding into the next, a gray monotony of regret and solitude. The silence of the house grew heavier, suffocating, a constant reminder of the life I had lost, of the choices I'd made. I spent hours replaying every moment, every decision, wondering if there had been another path, a way to salvage something, anything, of the life we'd shared. One evening, as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I opened it, expecting some mundane notification. But my breath caught as I read the words. "This is Claire's sister, Rachel. I thought you should know. Claire is gone." I stood there, the words blurring before my eyes, the world spinning around me. She had taken her own life. For a moment, I felt nothing, just a blank, empty numbness. And then the reality hit me like a wave, crashing over me, drowning me in an overwhelming surge of grief and regret. She was gone, truly, irreversibly gone. The next few days passed in a blur. I attended the service, stood quietly at the back as her family and a handful of friends gathered to say goodbye. Her mother, who had once embraced me as a son, couldn't even look at me. I knew what they were thinking, what they all believed, that I had pushed her to this, that my need for revenge had cost her everything. But the truth was worse than that. I knew, deep down, that I had been so focused on my own pain, my own anger, that I hadn't seen hers. I had been so blinded by the need for justice that I had ignored the small part of her that had once loved me, that had once been mine. In the end, my victory had come at a cost far greater than I had ever imagined. As I walked away from the service, the weight of my actions settled over me, pressing down with a suffocating heaviness. Claire was gone, but her absence would haunt me for the rest of my life. In my quest for revenge, I had lost more than just a marriage. I had lost myself, too. And in the end, I was left with nothing but regret, a hollow echo of the life we could have had, a life I would never know.